Assault rifles in Helldivers 2 are in an interesting place right now. After being considered quite weak, Arrowhead has done some work to buff these guns, reducing the time to kill and ultimately trying to bring these to be on par with the other weapon categories. And this has shaken up the assault rifle category quite a bit. But now that the dust has settled, one question remains. Which one is the best? Dr. Pooplove here, and let's discuss. And for this video, I want to focus in on how these guns perform against the Terminids. But rest assured, I will also be making a video covering the bots. And we will do this by talking about each gun and ranking each one on a tier list. S being the best and poop hate being the worst. And I will say, I don't think many of you will agree with a lot of my assessments here. I do have some hot poop takes on some of these guns that definitely don't seem to line up with a lot of what I'm reading in the comments or checking on the subreddit. Regardless, I can't tell a lie here, so this is where the guns belong for me. Starting with the base Liberator. Perhaps this is the most boring of the options, since this is the gun you start out with from the beginning. But honestly, this gun manages to hold its own versus the bugs. Now, yes, it has light armor penetration, but most bugs have a workaround that means that you can get them without needing to have a medium or higher penetration level. Accuracy of this gun is great with a pretty low recoil and a decently big mag size, at least compared to most of the other assault rifles, which has been a major complaint in this weapon category. Now, the AR-23 Liberator doesn't have the highest damage, but it doesn't feel like it takes too long to take out most enemies. Bile spewers, though, do seem to take a while. Even though the Liberator did get an increased durability damage buff, it still seems to take a bit to take these guys down. And of course, hive guards will be a challenge due to their medium armor, but generally it does feel good to use this gun versus the bugs, and I think it holds its own, even on harder difficulties. And for that, I will give the AR-23 Liberator a B. Now, let's move on to the Liberator Penetrator, which is not so great. Yes, this thing does have medium armor penetration, and it seems like it has a good durability damage, and it also has low recoil, as well as more total mags than most other assault rifles. And so you would think this would actually be in a good spot, but ultimately the damage on this rifle is just too low. You can really feel how long it takes to take down even the lower tiered enemies, and because it takes more bullets to kill them, it ends up chewing through your bullets so fast that even the extra mags don't really seem like it's making a big difference. There also is basically no stagger here, so it just becomes a struggle using this thing against a lot of the bugs that end up trying to swarm you. The thing is, I want this gun to be good so badly, as it's a cool idea. It's got a cool premise of being a high penetrating rifle, but ultimately, because of that low damage, it just doesn't feel that good to use. And ultimately, this gun is just poop, and not the kind that you love, the kind that you hate. So unfortunately, it does get put at the bottom in the poop hate category. Now, moving on to the Liberator Concussive, which is where I think I'm about to ruffle some feathers, because I think this gun is good. Maybe it's not good for the way most people play, but it is pretty good for a niche playstyle, and it actually opens up a new way for players to play and enjoy this game. Yes, the fire rate is low on this, but the stagger force is extremely high. And as a result, you can basically roam around the map and feel pretty safe, keeping enemies off of you with ease. Even when you are facing off against a huge horde, you can feel safe because the bullets on this thing push the enemies back. It doesn't have a ton of damage, and ultimately, this is not an offensive gun. This is a defensive gun, which keeps yourself protected and allows you to maintain your health. But also, this can be used to clump the enemies up and unleash a horde clearing item, such as a bomb or flamethrower, something with a lot of high damage to clear the area. In this way, I do think this gun is pretty underrated for what potential it actually has to help you out in a match. And for that, I give it a B. Feel free to fight me in the comments on this. Now, let's move on to the Adjudicator. Now, this gun has had an interesting journey. Being initially labeled as a marksman rifle, it has been retuned as an assault rifle, and also recently saw a buff. Now, I like this gun even before the most recent buff, but now it has more durability damage and more bullets per mag, which was one of the major criticisms before. This thing has medium armor penetration, which is great. It allows it to take on enemies without having to shoot through cracks or around the spewer armor. And it also has has a high damage, which means you can take out bugs pretty quickly. And really the main thing you need to do here with this gun is to control the recoil, which is pretty high. The engineering kit armor is a great option for this, and doing a bunch of crouch shooting whenever you are at a bit of a distance is an effective strategy. Ultimately, this gun feels pretty good to use. The ammo does still feel a bit low, and feeling like you have to choose a specific armor type like the engineering kit does kind of keep this from being an S for me, but it is pretty close, and therefore I will give this guy an A. Now, if any of my selections have pissed you off so far, this next one will probably take the cake. Let's move on to the sickle, or should I say the suckle. That's right, I'm bringing the heat. And yes, while this is considered an energy weapon, this is basically still an assault rifle, so it would be wrong to not cover it here too. But I have to say, I am not really a fan of the sickle. Now, on paper, this thing looks pretty OP. Unlimited ammo, low recoil, a ton of bullets coming out before the heatsink gets too hot. It has a lot going for it. But in practice, I just don't feel like this is that good. The main thing for me is the wind-up time, which means that bullets don't come out right away. And because of that, it kind of feels like you're playing on like a bad computer monitor with super high input lag. Now, yes, I know in order to compensate for this, you should try to be more anticipatory and just get used to the timing that it takes and use that to your advantage. But one of the things that I think is still a problem here is that the bugs do tend to pounce you and jump at you and do things that basically require you to have some pretty fast reflex time. And so as predictive as you can possibly be, you're not going to always be able to be ready for that pouncing enemy. And many times it just means that you end up taking a good amount of damage before your bullets even start coming out. Now, the damage of this rifle itself also does feel quite low, especially versus the bile spewers, which perhaps the durability damage is not that high on this. But I will also say not being able to see hit markers with this gun means I'm not really getting a ton of feedback versus medium armor enemies to know if my bullets are landing and damaging these guys. Now, it is cool that you can fire very long with this thing and that you basically have infinite ammo, but I think another one of my main problems here is, for me, I like to pulse fire and be a little bit more precise with my shots. I know I don't have to do that as much with a gun that doesn't have ammo, but continuing to fire does heat up that heatsink, and the cooldown time for this feels pretty long, and that ends up putting me off the fight for a good amount of time. Ultimately, I feel like this cooldown trade-off, instead of just reloading and maybe using up your supplies, is not enough. For this reason, this is gonna get a C. But go ahead, leave a comment and let me know why I am wrong. Okay, so now let's move on to the Tenderizer, which used to be a worse version of the base Liberator, but has since gotten a nice buff. Now, this gun does feel good. It has very high damage, super low recoil, making it very accurate and precise, and it does have some decent durability damage too, which is great. Ultimately, wielding this gun just makes you feel strong against the bugs. And while it does have only light armor penetration, the accuracy means you can shoot the light armor spots on the medium enemies with decent effect, and it's not too hard to deal with that. The main issue I do see with the Tenderizer is the clip size does feel a bit low, and as a result, it can be hard for me to conclude that this is like an S tier, especially when facing off against the hordes of bugs. And for that reason, I'm gonna give it an A. Okay, so now for the Liberator Carbine, and to be honest, I really like this gun. Yes, it is essentially a sped up version of the base Liberator, but that means that your time to kill on enemies is very fast. The recoil on this thing is pretty high, but if you crouch and utilize things like the engineering kit armor, you can control it and make quick work of enemies. And it's also pretty great at those close ranges where you can hip fire, and having that super high rate of fire means that those pesky bugs are taken care of. Ultimately, I think this gun is great, but it also does feel like it suffers from some of the same reasons as the Adjudicator, where it just feels like it gets a little bit low on bullets and requires the engineering kit armor for use. It's hard to choose between this and the Adjudicator for my top pick, but I think ultimately the Adjudicator will probably win out just because it has that medium armor penetration. But the Carbine will still get an A. I couldn't find an S tier in this list, at least not for the bugs. I do think it will be a little bit of a different story for the bots, but ultimately what I am looking for in an S tier is something that just feels exceptional in all or most regards, or has a super unique benefit to it. I think I'm aligned with a lot of the criticisms so far with assault rifles, which is that a lot of them just need a few more bullets in the mag. I think if that were the case for guns like the Carbine, the Adjudicator, or even the Tenderizer, these would move up to an S tier for me. But because of that, it just kept it back a little bit. But what do you think? Where would you rank these guns? Because I'm pretty sure you might not rank them the same as me. Let me know in the comments. And I want to say a special thank you to my YouTube members for joining the Bowel Movement. But otherwise, so long, Pooper Troopers.